SCP-217 is called the Clockwork virus. Based on the thumbnail, what I think that this is about is something that changes someone's body functions or body organs to the cybernetic versions of them. So I've always been fascinated with cybernetics, in fantasy mostly. I'm not trying to get like mechanical fingers or anything to type faster, but things like that are really, really cool in fantasy stories. Wouldn't you agree? Optical implants to give you night vision, or, you know, cybernetic muscles to strengthen you, maybe even make you jump higher or run faster. Things like that in things like universes like Shadowrun and any kind of dystopian universe, cyberpunk. They are a lot of fun to kind of make stories around or whatever. So I'm thinking this SCP is going to be really, really cool. It's Detective Void today, guys. Make sure to subscribe to him, and let's get into this reaction.
I'm sure that each of you have heard the opinion that technology has captivated the modern world.
Yes.
No, I'm not going to talk about the dangers of devices or gadgets.
Okay.
My name's Detective Void, and we only discuss SCP objects on this channel.
So
Today,
anomalous.
our focus is on SCP-217, aka the Clockwork virus.
Right.
It has a certain pedigree, so we'll talk about a whole series of objects, among which are even aliens and gods. In 1943, this anomalous little family narrowly took over the world. But we'll get to that in due time. SCP-217 belongs to the Keter class and is an incurable virus previously unknown to science.
Incurable.
It's transmitted during contact with either a contaminated surface or an infected living creature. In the latter case, bodily fluids from infected subjects also become dangerous.
Wow.
Meanwhile, the chance of getting infected during contact is
like
almost
DayZ type
100%.
stuff.
The pathogen is dangerous for all organisms in the animal kingdom. That is, it doesn't just affect plants, mushrooms, other viruses,
it affects
and bacteria.
everything.
In addition to its incredible resistance, SCP-217 has the ability to not manifest in an infected person's body for a long time. People may not experience symptoms for several years, or they may not pay attention to them. The virus affects the structure of living tissues, turning them into something called organic metal. The biochemical processes in the body change, and together with an unknown anomalous force, they transform the infected creature into a complex clock mechanism, consisting of a multitude of gears and other parts that take over the functions of the corresponding parts of the body.
This is kind of crazy, actually.
The joints change to a system of gears.
Right.
The heart turns into a mechanism of tubes and gears.
It's like steampunk,
and the eyes
man.
function like old film cameras.
Yeah.
Foundation scientists have not yet been able to study the transformation
not even
process
really
in detail.
high
It's
tech,
known that in
just
the early
clockwork.
stages of SCP-217 infection, the subject may experience only mild agitation, sleep disturbances, and joint stiffness.
Okay.
The phase of changes
Joint
that cause
stiffness?
severe pain comes later. These mutations primarily
pain.
manifest on the surface
Not
of the body
good.
in all creatures except mammals, including
Okay.
humans. The transformation of a person begins from the inside and can be fully completed before the appearance of external symptoms.
Wow.
The initial stages of infection are accompanied by a severe apathy and a general blunting of emotional reactions.
And
some of the infected
emotional
patients reported
blunting.
feeling movement under their skin and an accompanying ticking noise. It can be heard throughout the
ticking.
whole body with a stethoscope. For an infected
Right.
person, the sounds are most distinct when the pathogen spreads through the shoulders, neck, and head.
Sure.
In the later stages of infection, but before the appearance of external symptoms, the patient's mental state worsens. They're in a depressed mood all the time.
I guess
and get
so.
irritated when faced with new tasks.
Sure.
The actions of the infected become repetitive and mechanical, and they easily lose focus
like a
and
robot.
get distracted. There have been studies of the human brain after complete transformation, but the results are classified. In the
Okay.
stage when major internal organs and structures are being transformed,
Can you
the subjects
imagine,
begin to
bruh?
experience severe pain. They turn
Right.
into parts made of either organic metal that looks like steel, iron, and brass,
Yeah.
or of materials that look like rubber, leather, wood, or glass.
Gotcha.
These parts cut into the
That's
remaining living
crazy,
tissue,
dude.
causing a sensation like a torn ligament or a knife wound.
Oh my
The new
god.
structural elements of the body have the density and strength of the materials they resemble. Meanwhile, they're much more resilient and contain the DNA of the infected patient.
I see.
Parts of the mechanism
they're
are capable
sort
of
of
regeneration,
organic.
but it's noticeably slower than in living tissues.
Gotcha.
Experiments have shown that the parts transformed by the virus can be replaced. The body is not harmed by the use of spare parts made of ordinary technical material. They should
that's
be made
kinda
from the
neat.
same metal that the damaged biomechanical analog looks like.
Sure.
In fact, a person infected with SCP-217 can be repaired like a car. The Foundation is aware of at least one incident involving
Listen,
a mass
can you
infection
repair
of
my
the
wife?
Clockwork
She's kinda
virus in
beat up,
several
man.
metropolitan areas. The date of the incident and the names of the localities are classified, so it's unclear
Sure.
whether there's still a
Always
threat of undetected
classified,
cases
man.
among the residents of these cities. A sample of SCP-217 is currently being held in one of the Foundation zones.
All right.
There are airlocks on both sides of its chamber for entry and exit.
Sure. I don't know if I'd want
to be in the object's containment area if you have on a full protective suit, a sterilizing chemical shower, a 24-hour quarantine, and post-exposure medical observation are also required.
I mean,
in
that's
the case of
good because it's so
the protocol requires that the area containing the virus be sealed off, along with the laboratories where it's studied.
It said sealed
off. A
off,
chemical agent, ZIR-217-11, is used to neutralize the pathogen and is sprayed in the air. All those infected with SCP-217 are isolated and monitored. The surface of items that may have been touched by infected persons must be sterilized.
Sure.
SCP-217 is part of a whole group of objects that make up one anomalous mechanical organism. There's a hub that worships it as a god. This is a religious organization called the Church of the Broken God Hub.
Okay.
They believe biological life to be evil, and they worship mechanization.
I didn't
think
that there was actually a disease
brought together a whole set of anomalous items. As a result, they ended up with something called the Broken God, or SCP-001. The mechanical entity came to life in 1942 near La Paz, Mexico. This iron leviathan raised a real hell there, known in the Foundation as the 001 Apotheosis Event. It caused large-scale
I didn't
destruction
realize
of the
that this disease actually had to do with Church of the Broken God. That's interesting.
At that point, a weak and small organization, the Allied Occult Initiative, came to the rescue.
Right.
It later became the basis for the now powerful Global Occult Coalition. The occultists had an artifact that could allegedly stop the Broken God. The Foundation delivered an agent with an anomalous object to the 001 Apotheosis site. Then, on June 25th, 1943, an employee of the Occult Initiative somehow summoned another huge mechanical entity. It's now known as a malfunctioning destroyer, or SCP-2399.
Yep.
It's not known exactly what happened, but the resulting mechanism shot a beam at SCP-001 and a powerful explosion occurred. As a result, the Broken God broke up into separate active components. SCP-2399 is inexplicably located on Jupiter, where it caused the Great Red Spot to appear. It's known that since 1971, the object has received an electromagnetic signal from the Triangulum Galaxy, which is 3 million light-years from our planet. But let's get back to the events of 43. The Foundation put the separate parts of the destroyed SCP-001 into containment. Among them was the Clockwork virus. It was activated by another object, SCP-882, aka A Machine. It is strictly forbidden to place the object near SCP-217. The machine is a large pile of screws, gears, belts, and other parts. It assimilates all metal objects that it comes into contact with, turning them into new parts of its mechanism. All of them constantly rotate while making almost no noise. Another component of SCP-001 was an object made of wires. It received the number SCP-229, along with the nickname Wireweed. This is a 94-kilogram parasite identified as a silicone life form. It feeds off of electricity and attacks anything that generates even the weakest current. The entity can enter living organisms, enveloping the spine and brain. In this way, it can force the host to move towards the source of electricity. Joint experiments with SCP-229 and SCP-217 are allowed only with the permission of members of the O5 Council.
The rubber
Another
was the
object
one
from
we
this
reacted
series is
to.
SCP-1139, or the Broken Tongue. This is a 20-centimeter tall metal cuboid. If the object is exposed to an electric current, then anyone in the vicinity starts to speak an unknown language. Meanwhile, all of the victims forget and cannot relearn any world languages in existence.
Oh my.
The reach of the effect's radius is exponentially proportional to the strength of the current. A weak static shock, for instance, affects people within an 80-centimeter radius. The only way to restore a person's ability to speak normally is to treat them with Class AA amnestics. During one of the raids on the Church of the Broken God outpost, Foundation operatives also discovered object SCP-808, named the Mechanical Choir. This is a 16-meter cylindrical structure that tapers into a cone at the top. Its base covers 30 square meters, and was supposedly intended to be a musician at the time of the Broken God's return. After the conclusion of the 001 Apotheosis event and the elimination of all its anomalous components, only the inactive part of SCP-001 remained. This pile of scrap metal ended up at the bottom of the Gulf of California. Foundation specialists noted that if the entity had been revived amidst the current level of technology, it probably would have been impossible to avoid an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. Indeed, even back in 1943, only members of the Occult Initiative were able to save humanity. So the Foundation had to reckon with the fact that other organizations own anomalous items too. As for the Church of the Broken God Hub, they had even attacked one of the Foundation zones. Its cover building was that of a certain company, whose name includes the word motors. A kamikaze girl drove into the building in a car, filled with canisters containing flammable compounds. The subsequent explosion destroyed the cover building and killed 5 agents. The zone itself was not damaged, but was locked down for 8 hours due to the attack that followed the explosion. The kamikaze turned out to be a girl named Amanda. We know that she fell under the cult's influence, dropping out of college and disappeared.
Her eyes are black.
The girl was declared missing, since she hadn't contacted her parents for 2 years. She had probably spent all this time in the hub. As you can see, in addition to the danger that these anomalous objects pose, the SCP Foundation has to deal with related organizations, some of which are hostile.
Sure.
And although on the one hand, the occultist helped to stop the mechanical entity, on the other, the entity was created by hub members.
Right.
The Foundation's eternal ethical dilemma regarding the destruction of anomalies is particularly poignant in the history of this object. If the components of SCP-001 were unobtainable, the entity would not exist. Although in the Church of the Broken God, you could use a different object and get something completely different. But if the GOC had destroyed the artifact that summoned a malfunctioning destroyer from Jupiter, then you and I would no longer be able to philosophize on this topic.
Right,
Many
because
objects
the entire
contained
world
in the
would be
Foundation
taken
and
over.
other organizations pose a threat to humanity. Even SCP-217 can turn all living things into their own mechanical copies.
Yeah.
Do you think the SCP Foundation should destroy anomalous objects, or is the risk of their containment justified? Write about it in the comments below.
I honestly think that it's justified. You know, you have a system of checks and balances with other organizations like the GOC, and honestly, with that in mind, you know, there's not just one central governing power, right? I think, at least that's what I think. If it would just be up to the SCP Foundation, which they have done a good job with containment and stuff so far, there have been containment breaches, and having other organizations like allies, not necessarily with the same objectives or motives that the SCP Foundation has, but something that can help them, you know, in times where the XK class events occur. I think it's important to have that. Anyway, guys, Detective Void, make sure to subscribe to him, as well as a couple other reactions that I've done. Thanks so much for watching. As always, this is Zueljin signing off. We'll see you next time.